Lina Vale, a 5-year-old girl with an unwavering belief in the goodness of the world, stands over the body of her father, Daniel, in a rain-slicked alley. When Viktor Draven, a ruthless Mafia boss who just ordered the erasure of the man, approaches to finish the job, Lina shushes him, whispering that her daddy is just very sleepy from working so hard. Stunned by her innocence and haunted by a sudden, inexplicable guilt, Viktor cannot leave her behind. He takes Lina into his world of shadows, pretending her father is away on a long business trip. As Viktor raises her, he finds himself caught between his role as a cold-blooded leader and the surrogate father Lina believes him to be. The story culminates when Lina discovers the truth as a young adult, forcing Viktor to face the ultimate judgment. Can the man who destroyed her past truly be the one to protect her future? The rain didn't just fall, it screamed against the cracked pavement of the narrow alley. It was the kind of cold that soaked through skin and settled deep in the bone. Viktor Draven stood tall, his black coat gleaming like ink under the flickering street lamp. In his hand, the weight of the metal felt familiar and cold, a tool he had used 1,000 times to erase problems. At his feet, Daniel Vale lay perfectly still. The job was done. The silence of the city was about to swallow the secret forever. Then, a small sound broke the rhythm of the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was a soft, rhythmic hum. Viktor turned, his thumb clicking the safety of his weapon. He expected a witness to run or a rival to fire. Instead, he saw a splash of bright yellow. A little girl, no older than 5, stepped out from behind a rusted dumpster. She wore a tiny raincoat and clutched a teddy bear whose fur was matted and gray from the dampness. Her big, brown eyes weren't full of terror. They were wide with a strange, quiet hope. Viktor froze. He had face-down arms and stared into the eyes of monsters, but the sight of this small, trembling human made his breath catch in his throat. He took a step toward her, his shadow looming large and terrifying over the wet ground. "Hey," he rasped, his voice rough like grinding stones. "What are you doing here?" The girl didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she took a tiny step forward and pressed a small, pale finger to her lips. "Shhh," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the rain. "You have to be very, very quiet." Viktor stopped. His heart, a piece of ice he thought had frozen solid years ago, gave a painful thud. "Why?" She pointed a small hand toward the man lying on the pavement. A tear escaped her eye, mixing with the rain on her cheek, but she offered a tiny, innocent smile. "My daddy is having a big nap," she whispered. "He's been working so hard to buy me the yellow shoes. He's just really sleepy. Please don't wake him up." Viktor looked down at Daniel. He looked back at the girl, Lina. The heavy gun in his hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She didn't know. She truly believed that the red staining her father's shirt was just a shadow, and that the cold ground was a bed. The cold czar of the underworld felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the weather. For the first time in his life, Viktor Draven couldn't finish a job. He couldn't leave her here, and he couldn't tell her the truth. "He is very sleepy, little one," Viktor said, his voice trembling as he tucked the weapon away. "Why don't you come with me? We'll let him rest." The rain continued to pour, turning the world into a blur of gray and black. Viktor looked down at his expensive leather shoes, now ruined by the mud of the alley, and then back at the tiny girl. Lina stood there, shivering in her yellow raincoat, her eyes still fixed on her father with a look of pure, heartbreaking love. Viktor knew he should walk away. In his world, witnesses were loose ends, and loose ends got you killed. But as she reached out and tucked a stray piece of wet hair behind her ear, he saw her small hand shaking from the cold. "Is he going to wake up soon?" she asked, her voice small and thin against the wind. Viktor's throat felt tight. He had spent his life making hard choices, but this was different. He couldn't leave a 5-year-old alone in a dark alley with a ghost. He took a deep breath, knelt down so he was closer to her height, and tried to soften his jagged features into something that looked like a smile. "Your daddy is going to be sleeping for a very long time, Lina," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "In fact, he has to go away for a while. A big business trip. Somewhere far, far away where it doesn't rain." Lina's lip trembled. She gripped her teddy bear tighter against her chest. Without me? He always takes me to get cocoa on Saturdays. Viktor reached out, hesitating before resting a hand on her small shoulder. He asked me to look after you until he gets back. He wants you to stay in a big house with warm blankets and all the cocoa you can drink. Would you like that? Lina looked at the man on the ground, then back at Viktor. She saw the strength in his shoulders and the way his eyes seemed to promise safety, even if she didn't understand the darkness hidden in them. Slowly, she nodded. She reached out and took Viktor's large, scarred hand with her tiny, soft one. He led her out of the alley and toward his sleek black car. His men were waiting, their faces masks of confusion as they saw their boss carrying a child's worn teddy bear while leading a little girl by the hand. Viktor didn't say a word to them. He opened the heavy door and helped Lina slide into the heated leather seat. As the car pulled away, Lina pressed her face against the window, watching the alley disappear into the shadows. Viktor watched her in the rearview mirror, realizing he had just collected something far more dangerous than money or power. He had taken a piece of the light, and now he had to make sure the darkness of his life never touched her. Viktor's estate sat high on a hill, surrounded by iron gates and stone walls that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. To the rest of the world, it was a fortress of fear. But for Lina, Viktor turned it into a golden cage. He filled the tall, quiet rooms with soft rugs, bright toys, and the smell of baking cookies. He hired the best tutors to teach her piano and French, and kind women to read her stories before bed. To Lina, Viktor wasn't a mob boss, he was the tall, serious man who always made sure her cocoa had exactly 3 marshmallows. Outside her bedroom door, however, the world stayed cold. Viktor moved through the hallways like a ghost, his face turning back into stone the moment he left her sight. He knew that for his link to work, the truth had to be buried deeper than Daniel Vale. He spent his nights in a sun office, meeting with men in dark suits. He was cleaning the city. Anyone who had been in that alley, anyone who knew the name Vale, and anyone who might whisper the truth to the girl in the yellow raincoat was silenced. He was building a wall of secrets so high that not even the wind could carry a rumor over it. His guards were given strict orders. They were to watch the perimeter for enemies, but they were also never to speak to Lina about the outside world. To them, she was the princess of shadows, a fragile jewel that the most dangerous man in the city was protecting with his life. They watched her play in the garden from behind their dark sunglasses, marveling at how a man who had erased so many could be so careful with a single child. One evening, Viktor stood on the balcony, watching Lina chase a butterfly through the roses. She looked up and waved, her smile bright and innocent. Viktor waved back, but his hand felt heavy. He had given her everything, the best clothes, the safest home, and a future full of light. But he knew that every brick of this fortress was built on a lie. He was keeping her safe from the world, but he was also keeping her safe from himself. As long as she believed her father was just on a long trip, Viktor could pretend he wasn't a monster. He had created a perfect bubble for her, and he would kill anyone who tried to pop it. The years moved like a slow river, changing the landscape of the estate but never the secrets hidden within its walls. Lina was no longer the tiny girl in the yellow raincoat. She was 12 now, with a sharp mind and a habit of wandering through the vast library when she was supposed to be studying her piano scales. Viktor was old, too. The gray at his temples made him look more like a weary king than a soldier, but his eyes remained as sharp as glass whenever he looked at the world outside. One rainy afternoon, while Viktor was away on business, Lina chased a stray ball into his private study. It was a room she was usually forbidden to enter, a place of dark wood, heavy curtains, and the faint scent of old paper and expensive tobacco. The room felt cold, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Near the window sat Viktor's heavy oak desk. On the corner of it sat her old teddy bear, the one she had carried the night her father went away. Viktor had kept it all these years, perched there like a silent guard. As she reached for the bear, her sleeve caught the edge of a small wooden box, knocking it onto the floor. The lid popped open, and a single, crumpled photograph slid out. Lina knelt to pick it up, expecting to see a picture of Viktor or perhaps a map. Instead, she saw a face that lived only in the hazy corners of her memory. It was her father, Daniel. He was laughing, holding a younger version of her in front of a bright ice cream shop. But the photo wasn't perfect. Across the bottom corner was a dark, reddish-brown stain, a smear that looked like dried mud but felt much more sinister. She turned the photo over. In her father's messy handwriting, he said, "Lina's 4th birthday." Below it, in a different, cold, and precise ink, was a single word that made her heart skip a beat: erased. Lina stared at the word. She knew what it meant in her schoolbooks, but seeing it here, next to her father's face, felt like a cold splash of water. If her father was on a business trip, why was his favorite photo in Viktor's secret box? And why was it stained with something that looked so much like the rust on the alley gates? She heard the heavy front doors of the estate creak open. Viktor was home. Quickly, she tucked the photo into her pocket and placed the teddy bear back on the desk. When Viktor walked into the room moments later, he saw her standing by the window, looking out at the rain. "Lina," he said, his voice warm but commanding. "You shouldn't be in here." "I know," she whispered, not turning around. "I just wanted to see if the rain was ever going to stop." Viktor looked at her, a small frown tugging at his lips. For the first time, he felt a flicker of fear. He had built a fortress to keep the truth out, but he hadn't realized that the truth was already inside, hidden in the pocket of a girl who was starting to ask questions. By the time Lina turned 16, the golden bubble Viktor had built was beginning to show cracks. She was no longer a child easily distracted by sweets or stories. She was observing, moving through the halls of the estate like a ghost. She noticed the way the air grew heavy when certain men arrived in armored SUVs. She noticed the bulge of weapons hidden beneath the jackets of her tutors and drivers. Most of all, she noticed the blood. One night, Lina was tucked away in an alcove near the grand staircase, reading a book, when the front doors burst open. Viktor stumbled in, supported by 2 of his men. His white dress shirt was ruined, soaked through with a deep, angry crimson. The metallic scent hit Lina instantly, the same smell she had found on the back of the photographer years ago. "Get the doctor," Viktor barked, his voice straining. "And make sure the girl stays in her room. She doesn't see this." Lina pulled back into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched them hurry him toward the private medical wing. He called her the girl, as if she were a fragile doll that would break if she saw a drop of blood. But she had already seen it. She saw it every time he returned with bruised knuckles or eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. Despite his injuries, Viktor remained obsessed with keeping her clean. He curated her life like a museum exhibit. She went to the best galleries, wore the finest silk, and spent her days surrounded by beauty. He wanted her to be a creature of light, someone who had never known a day of hunger or a moment of fear. He was trying to give her the life he had stolen from her in that alley, hoping that if he made her world perfect enough, the truth wouldn't matter. But the more he tried to shield her, the more Lina felt the weight of the shadows. She would sit at dinner with him, the table set with silver and fine china, and look at his large, steady hands. Those hands had tucked her into bed and wiped away her tears. But those same hands were the reason men whispered in fear when they heard the name Draven. "Is everything okay, Lina?" Viktor asked one evening, noticing her silence. He looked at her with such genuine care that it made her stomach turn. "Yes, Viktor," she lied, her hand brushing the hidden photograph in her pocket. "Everything is perfect." She realized then that she was playing a part in his play. She was his Princess of Shadows, a title given to her by the guards. She was the one beautiful thing in a world of monsters, but the monster was the one who had crowned her. And as she looked at his calm, fatherly face, she wondered how much blood had been spilled to keep her world so white and clean. The city was changing, and the peace Viktor had bought with blood was starting to burn. In a smoke-filled club across town, a man named Dante Volkov sat with a file spread across his lap. Dante was younger than Viktor, and far more cruel. He didn't care about honor or cleaning the city. He only cared about the throne that Viktor sat upon. For months, Dante had been looking for a crack in Viktor's armor, a single weakness he could exploit. Finally, he had found it. Dante stared at a grainy photo of a little girl in a yellow raincoat, then at a recent picture of Lina walking through a garden. He compared them to the old police report of a man named Daniel Vale, a man who had disappeared on the same night Viktor Draven rose to absolute power. A slow, jagged smile spread across Dante's face. He didn't need more soldiers or bigger guns to destroy Viktor. He just needed to tell a story. So, Dante whispered, his voice like a snake sliding through tall grass. The great Viktor Draven has a heart after all. And it's beating inside the chest of the daughter of the man he murdered. Dante knew that Viktor would die to protect Lina from a bullet. But could Viktor survive Lina's hatred? If Dante could reach her, if he could show her the truth that had been hidden for over a decade, Viktor's world would crumble from the inside out. The Princess of Shadows would realize she was living with the dragon that had burned her home to the ground. Back at the estate, the air felt thick and heavy, like the moments before a massive thunderstorm. Viktor was on high alert, his men patrolling the walls with heavy rifles. He could feel his enemies closing in, but he assumed they were coming for his money or his territory. He didn't realize that Dante Volkov wasn't loving his chest. He was loving the lie that held Viktor's life together. Lina sat in her room, the blood-stained photo of her father hidden under her pillow. She watched the black car circle the driveway below. She felt like a bird in a cage, sensing the predator outside even if she couldn't see it yet. She didn't know Dante Volkov's name, and she didn't know his plan. But as she looked at the erased note one more time, she realized that the walls of her fortress were no longer keeping the world out. They were trapping her in. The truth was coming, and when it arrived, it would be louder than any gunshot. The storm that had been brewing finally broke, but not with thunder. It happened during a rare trip to the city library, a place Viktor allowed her to visit only with a heavy guard. The attack was silent and fast. Smoke canisters filled the street, turning the world white, and before Lina's guards could draw their weapons, she was pulled into the back of a van. There was no shouting, no demands for money. Just a cold, terrifying hand over her mouth and the smell of chemicals. When the blindfold was finally removed, Lina found herself in a warehouse that smelled of salt and old metal. Sitting across from her was a man with eyes as sharp as a hawk's. Dante Volkov didn't look like the monsters Viktor had warned her about. He looked like a businessman, calm and patient. "Where is Viktor?" Lina asked, her voice trembling but her head held high. "He will come for me. You know what he does to people who take things from him." Dante laughed, a dry sound that chilled her blood. "Oh, I know exactly what he does, Lina. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to give you something he's been stealing from you for 11 years. He leaned forward, tossing a thick folder onto her lap. Inside were police records, crime scene photos, and statements from witnesses who had long since disappeared. Lina's breath hitched as she saw a photo of the very alley she remembered from her dreams, the one with the flickering street lamp and the heavy rain. "Viktor tells you he's your protector," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He tells you your father went on a business trip because it's easier than telling you the truth. He didn't find you that night, Lina. He was created that night." Lina shook her head, her hands clutching the folder so hard the crumpled paper. "You're lying. He loves me." "He loves the version of you that doesn't know who he is," Dante countered. He pulled out a final document, a ballistic report matching Viktor's signature weapon to the bullet taken from Daniel Vale. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted to see if he could grow a flower in the dirt he created. "Your father didn't fall asleep, Lina. Viktor erased him. He shushed you in the rain while your father's blood was still on his hands." The world seemed to tilt. Every memory of Viktor, the warm cocoa, the stories, the way he tucked her in, began to twist into something hideous. The Princess of Shadows looked down at the evidence of her father's death, and the golden cage finally shattered. She wasn't a princess. She was a trophy built on a grave. The news of Lina's disappearance turned Viktor Draven back into the monster he had tried to hide. He didn't call the police, he called every shadow in the city. Within minutes, his fleet of black cars was screaming through the streets, tires screeching against the asphalt. Viktor sat in the back of the lead car, his face a mask of cold fury. In his lap sat the old, matted teddy bear he had taken from the alley all those years ago. He realized now that he had been trying to pay a debt that could never be settled. He had traded a man's life for a girl's love, and now both were slipping through his fingers. "Sir, we've tracked the van to Volkov's warehouse," his driver said, his voice trembling. "It's a trap. He has men on every roof. He's waiting for you." "Let him wait," Viktor whispered. He didn't care about the trap. He didn't care about the bullets or the throne he had spent 20 years building. To the world, he was a king, but as he gripped the teddy bear, he knew the truth: without Lina, he was just a ghost in an expensive suit. She was the only part of him that wasn't stained by the darkness. She was his only real thing. The cars slammed through the warehouse gates in a hail of glass and metal. Viktor was the first one out, moving with a terrifying speed that ignored the gunfire around him. He wasn't hiding behind his men today. He fought like a man possessed, his eyes fixed on the office at the back of the building where he knew Lina was being held. Every time he pulled a trigger or threw a punch, he felt the weight of the blood debt he owed. He had killed her father, and now he would kill everyone else to keep her breathing. He kicked open the heavy metal door of the office, his gun raised. Dante Volkov stood there, a smug smile on his face, but Viktor didn't even look at him. His eyes went straight to Lina. She was sitting in a chair, the file of truth opened at her feet. She wasn't crying. She was looking at Viktor with eyes that were no longer full of hope. They were empty. "Lina," Viktor gasped, his voice breaking. He took a step toward her, reaching out a hand covered in fresh dust and old scars. "Don't," she said. The word was sharper than any bullet. Viktor froze. He had saved her body from the rival, but as he looked into her cold, distant gaze, he realized he had lost her soul. He had turned the city apart to find her, only to find that the girl who called him father had died the moment she read that file. He had paid the blood debt, but the cost was the only person who had ever truly loved him. The warehouse fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Dante Volkov lay slumped in the corner, defeated, but the real battle was only just beginning. Viktor took a step toward Lina, his hands trembling. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her that the nightmare was over and they could go back to their quiet life at the estate. But as he reached out, Lina moved with a cold, terrifying speed he had never seen before. She snatched the backup pistol from Viktor's own belt. Before he could even blink, she had the barrel leveled straight at his chest. "Lina, put that down," Viktor whispered, his voice cracking. "It's dangerous. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Lina replied. Her voice didn't sound like a teenager anymore, it sounded like someone who had lived 100 years in a single afternoon. Her hands were steady, even as tears blurred her vision. "I've been living in a house of ghosts, Viktor. I want to hear you say it. No more business trips. No more stories about sleepy men." Viktor felt the cold metal of the gun pointing at his heart, but the pain in his chest was much worse. He looked at the girl he had raised, the one he had tried so hard to keep clean, and realized that the dirt of his world had finally touched her. He couldn't lie anymore. The wall of secrets had finally crumbled. "Tell me," she demanded, her finger tightening on the trigger. "The man in the alley. My father. What did you do to him?" Viktor closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the rain and the yellow raincoat again. "I erased him," he admitted, the words feeling like shards of glass in his throat. "I was sent to finish a job, and I did it. I didn't know you were there until it was too late. I thought if I took you, if I gave you everything, I could make up for the hole I left in your life." "You didn't take me to save me," Lina sobbed, her voice rising. "You took me to save yourself. You wanted to feel like a good man while you were still a monster." "Yes," Viktor whispered, bowing his head. He didn't try to take the gun. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply stood there, waiting for the judgment of the only person who mattered. "I am a monster, Lina. And the worst thing I ever did wasn't kill him, it was making you love the man who did it." Lina stared at him, the gun shaking now as the weight of the truth crashed down on her. The man who had taught her to ride a bike, who had held her hair when she was sick, was the same man who had turned her father into a memory. The hero and the villain were the same person, and she was holding the weapon that could end it all. Viktor dropped his hands to his sides, standing defenseless in the center of the cold warehouse. He didn't reach for another weapon, and he didn't try to explain himself again. The sirens of his own men were wailing in the distance, but they felt a world away. He looked at the barrel of the gun Lina held and then up into her eyes. For the first time, he wasn't the boss, the protector, or the king. He was just a man waiting for the end of a story he had started in the rain 11 years ago. "Do it, Lina," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "If you pull that trigger, the debt is paid. I won't stop you. I've lived 1,000 lives of violence, and I deserve to have it end by the hand of the only person I ever truly loved." Lina's finger trembled against the cold metal. Her mind was a storm of memories, the smell of the rain in the alley, the taste of the hot cocoa Viktor made for her, and the jagged word erased written on her father's photo. The anger inside her was a hot, burning fire, telling her to take back the life he had stolen. She looked at Viktor, seeing the man who had destroyed her past and the man who had built her future. The silence stretched out, heavy and painful. Slowly, the fire in Lina's eyes began to dim, replaced by a deep, hollow sadness. Her hand stopped shaking, but she didn't fire. Instead, she slowly lowered the gun. With a click, she engaged the safety and set the weapon down on the dusty floor between them. "If I kill you," Lina whispered, her voice thick with tears, "then the monster wins. You erased my father, Viktor. But you didn't erase the girl he raised. He was a good man. He wouldn't want me to become like you." Viktor felt a sob catch in his chest. He had expected death, but he hadn't expected this. Lina walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. She didn't look back at the empire, the money, or the man who had kept her in a golden cage. "I'm leaving," she said, stopping at the door. "I don't want your house or your name. I'm going to find out who Daniel Vale really was, without your lies." Viktor watched her walk out into the gray morning light. He was still the most powerful man in the city, but as the door closed, he realized he was finally, truly alone. He had given her everything, but in the end, her mercy was the only thing he couldn't buy. Lina was free, and Viktor was left with nothing but the shadows he had created, finally understanding that some debts can never be paid, they can only be forgiven.